Hello, tiny humans, and welcome to week 8 of our Read Aloud in the Civil Rights Movement. Last week, we got to talk about the importance of news outlets in alerting the American public of the injustices and the violence that the civil rights leaders were met with during the 1960s. We also talked about Lyndon B. Johnson and the signing of the Civil Rights Act. Today, we are reading from pages 42 to 48. And as we read, I want you to think about this essential question. What strategies did various organizations use during the civil rights movement? What did they have in common? Or how are they different? This week, we're beginning chapter 4, Pride and Power. We're going to start off with this text feature, which is a picture of President Lyndon Johnson chatting with Senator Everett Dirksen and Vice President Hubert Humphrey after signing the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So, as a quick refresher, what was the purpose of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and what did it give people the power to do? So I'm going to pick back up on page 43 at the very top on August 6, 1965. On August 6, 1965, President Johnson signed the new Voting Rights Act into law. The act outlawed all discriminatory voting practices, which had prevented many African Americans from voting. Thousands of African Americans registered to vote. By 1969, 61% of African Americans who were able to vote were registered. But the news was not all good. As marchers were making their way from Montgomery back to Selma, one of their drivers was murdered by the KKK. Differences between the SNCC and the SCLC were pulling the two organizations apart. In cities in the North, many people began to believe that nonviolence was not working quickly or effectively enough. I'm taking a moment to notice this text feature at the very top. Again, from the colors in the photo and the context, I'm going to go ahead and make a prediction that this is a historical photograph that's going to tell me something about these two organizations or the Civil Rights Act. In the photo, I see a man holding a newspaper that says, "A Savior is Born." And the caption says, "The Nation of Islam took a different approach to civil rights than peaceful protesters such as Martin Luther King Jr. had." So now we're going to start at our heading, Urban Problems. In northern cities, poverty and poor education systems gave African Americans few opportunities to escape from urban slums. Drugs and crime were widespread in some of these poor neighborhoods. In the midst of this grew the Nation of Islam, NOI, a religious organization founded by Wali Fard Muhammad. Muhammad preached pride, unity, and self-sufficiency within the African American community. Its members, known as Black Muslims, followed strict rules about behavior, dress, and treatment of women. The NOI urged the separation of the African American community from the white community. Nonviolence was not something they necessarily believed in. Malcolm X, a minister in the NOI, preached that rights and personal protection should be secured by any means necessary. I'm going to take this moment to look at this quick spotlight on Malcolm X, who's a name that a lot of us have heard before, but we might not understand how his movement was different than the ideas of Martin Luther King Jr. It says, born Malcolm Little in Omaha, Nebraska in 1925, Malcolm X was the son of a civil rights leader. His father died when Malcolm was 6. Malcolm dropped out of school and turned to crime. He was arrested and jailed in 1946. In prison, he was introduced to the teachings of Elijah Muhammad, the leader of the Nation of Islam. After he was released from prison, he became an NOI minister. In 1964, he left the NOI to create Muslim Mosque Incorporated, and later changed his name to El Jad Malik al-Shabazz. We're picking back up at the heading, Voting in Alabama. The Lowndes County Freedom Organization was formed in Alabama to counteract the white supremacist Democratic Party in the state. Its symbol was a Black Panther. The political party was organized by SNCC leader Stokely Carmichael. When the party's candidates ran for office in Lowndes County in 1965, about 3,900 people voted for them. The Black Panthers, as they became known, were viewed as a militant group within SNCC. In May 1966, Carmichael was voted national chairman of SNCC, taking over from John Lewis. Carmichael believed in a more assertive approach to civil rights, saying, "I'm not going to beg the white man for anything I deserve. I'm going to take it." Carmichael's phrase, Black Power, became a new motto for the movement. Dissent and separation. SNCC's new approach soon became apparent in Mississippi. Demonstrator James Meredith had organized a march in the state to support voter registration. When he was shot, SNCC and the SCLC decided to continue the march. Meredith survived the shooting. The Meredith marchers were beaten, showered in tear gas, and arrested. After he was released from jail, Carmichael expressed his frustration. Black Power was chanted by his followers and was later adopted by CORE. Rise of riots. In 1965, violence erupted in the mainly Black neighborhood of Watts in Los Angeles, California. The trouble began when a man named Marquette Fry was being arrested for driving drunk. A fight broke out, which turned into a raging mob. The mob looted and burned the neighborhood for days. 34 people were killed, and $40 million in property damage was caused. It took 22,500 police, supported by 14,000 members of the National Guard, to put a halt to the rioting. Americans were afraid the riots would spread to other cities. In an effort to curb the violence, King went on a tour of urban slums. In Chicago, a young activist named Jesse Jackson was sent to run SCLC's new Operation Breadbasket, an organization begun to improve the economic conditions of African American communities. Jackson and King tried to encourage peaceful protest, but the communities showed little interest. Many were instead listening to the arguments of the NOI, Stokely Carmichael, and the rising voice of the Black Panther Party. This chapter was full of words and events that I've never seen before. So now I'm going to take this time to go to my key events tracker and my glossary to go ahead and track my new learning.